Respect your father, they said, while he sat on my couch, ate my food, refused to wash a dish, and tried to boss me in the house I bought. I didn't shout. I did this. Then I set a deadline. He left the next morning. Quiet returned. I let my father and his new wife stay with me because, as he put it, they were temporarily having money troubles. I wanted to believe the temporary part. People stumble. Sometimes they just need a breather. But barely a month after they crossed my threshold, his wife tried to make me pay them monthly rent, as if I were living with them, not the other way around. The absurdity hit a nerve the way so many absurdities have in my life with my father, starting from the very beginning. My life was hard from the moment it began. My mother died giving birth to me. It wasn't just a line in the records or the careful looks from other people that reminded me of it. Most often, it was my father. Left alone, he chose not compassion, not patience, but blame. The guilty party was me, a baby who remembered nothing, chose nothing, could change nothing. Not a day of my childhood passed without him, in a rough voice, reminding me that my mother was gone because of me. He said my birth had taken the most precious person from him, and that he hadn't wanted a child at all. Sometimes it sounded like ritual, same words, same tone, the same weight I was supposed to carry silently. He had these checkbook of pain phrases he liked to cash, that my life cost him too much, that I had to work myself raw to make it worth it. Otherwise, my mother's death would be for nothing. Who puts that on a child? But back then, I didn't ask. I lived inside the reality his voice created, and every time those lines hit me like cold water, I felt something soft inside me curl up, the part that should have been my childhood. I was too little to sort his grief into tidy boxes. I needed a mother, too. She wasn't there, and the only parent I had left looked at me and saw a problem, a mistake, a reason for endless anger. The man who was supposed to be my protector, my guide, my comfort became the one who taught me, day after day, that I was unwanted, that my very existence was a curse. Growing up like that is like walking a frozen lake all the time. Don't breathe too loudly, don't move too fast, don't ask for anything, and maybe you won't hear the familiar crack of his displeasure underneath you. I felt guilty just for existing. Sometimes, on those fragile bridges of hope, I wanted to talk to him, to say how his words hurt, to ask him to stop. But fear was a heavy palm over my mouth. The rare times I tried, he answered with more bitterness and more rage. So I learned to be quiet. Silence became armor and a prison at once, shielding me from the immediate blow, but trapping me with the echo of his voice that never stopped in my head. Other kids had parents who signed them up for clubs, cheered for wins, comforted them after losses. I had a forever refrain: be grateful you're even here. I watched other families and thought maybe that was some parallel world I didn't get a pass to. At home, I counted steps in the hallway, trying to guess his mood as he came through the door, calculating whether today I could avoid the next blast. And still, somewhere inside me, that stubborn want for his approval kept breathing. The logic of children. If I'm good enough, better than good, he'll notice, he'll soften, he'll love me. I brought home report cards and caught myself almost running towards some stamp saying I wasn't a mistake. I would lay the paper in front of him like proof that I'd earned the right to exist, to a smile, to one warm word. It was the same every time. He barely looked, made a dissatisfied noise, told me to study harder. It's still not enough. Hundreds of girls get the same grades. What's so special about this? There was no curiosity in the questions, only cold erasure. Instead of pride, indifference. Instead of support, a list of what else I needed to prove. No matter how hard I tried, it was never enough for him. I learned the lesson. If you feel happy, keep it quiet. Safer that way. It wasn't just school. Every time I wanted anything outside of it, join a club, play soccer, go to an event with friends, he shut it down. The only thing you should focus on is school, so you can get out of my house as fast as possible. Those lines stuck to me like labels while I pretended not to see them. Not a daughter, an expense, a guest, a line item. He said it so often that I started to feel like I lived in a temporary room where you aren't allowed to leave any trace. No photos, no laughter, no perfume lingering in the air. Nothing. Weekends were no different from weekdays. If I asked for a couple hours with friends, he launched into a tirade about how I was spending his money, how nothing good would come of it. Even going to the park turned into a lecture about how hard he worked to pay for my schooling and how shameless it was to waste time on friendship. Anything that brought me joy was automatically tagged as frivolous. One of the worst memories, my 15th birthday. I wasn't asking for much. Movie with friends, pizza, a little laughter, the right to a small, ordinary celebration. I asked him for a bit of money. He made a scene, yelled that I had no right to celebrate because it was also the day my mother died, said it was the worst day of the year for him and I had no business enjoying it. I stood there and thought how strange it is to have no tiny island where happiness is allowed, not even for an hour. After that, I stopped trying to celebrate. What's the point? When any wish becomes a crime? Eventually, there were enough scenes that I believed him. He really did hate me, really didn't want me there. The constant rejection and criticism left deep scores. Sometimes it felt like my skin had gone thin. I stopped sharing hopes or plans. Any sentence could be turned into ammunition. I folded into myself and focused on one thing: getting out. Study, apply, win the scholarship. Build a bridge and go. Work and stubbornness paid off. I still remember the morning I found the acceptance letter in the mailbox. Full ride to a strong university. The envelope shook in my hands, maybe because I was shaking all over. It was relief and pride, and for the first time in a long time, a quiet joy no one got to snatch away. I was leaving. Stepping out from under his power, out from under the pressure I'd come to think of as air, into a chapter where I could live on my own terms. Leaving felt like a weight finally unclamping from my shoulders. On campus, I didn't have to read footsteps. I didn't have to hide my laughter. I studied the way I wanted, and in those moments when I let myself just be, not useful, not silent, not guilty, I realized I was still alive in there. Those 4 years were self-knowledge, growth, and the plain human joy people call a normal life. I didn't drop my grades. I kept the bar high, wringing every bit of value from the chance I'd fought for. But I found balance. I went to parties without apologizing to myself, joined clubs, tried new things, made friends. Somewhere between exams and late-night dorm conversations, I realized I wasn't broken beyond repair. That's when I met Sheila. It started like any campus acquaintance at an event where people drifted from table to table, smiling to be polite. But there was something about her right away. Clear eyes, a quiet that made you slow down. We were both ambitious, driven, stubborn, the kind of stubborn that doesn't quit at the first bump. Being with Sheila was easy. We could talk for an hour or say nothing at all, and it never got awkward. I hadn't known silence could be warm. I loved the way she listened. Like in that moment, nothing existed but me and my words. Loved that she didn't try to fix me or argue with my scars. She just stayed. Breathing got easier next to her. Sheila was the first person to speak aloud what I didn't dare. I didn't have to carry a borrowed guilt for the rest of my life. Kids aren't responsible for their mother's deaths. What was done to me was wrong. She pushed me, gently but firmly, to therapy. Not because something's wrong with you, but because too much of what happened to me should never happen to a child. At first I resisted. My father's language was etched too deep. Accepting help meant admitting it wasn't just strict at home, it was harmful. But I went. and things changed. Therapy was hard work. I unpacked memories I'd kept in the far drawer. I learned to tell my own feelings from the scripts he fed me. I named the injuries and stepped away from the main lie, that I needed to keep earning the right to exist. At first it was scary and exhausting. Peel back a layer, and there's another and another. But my angle on myself shifted. I saw how wrong my father's thinking was. Most of all, I saw that I wasn't to blame for my mother's death. His hate was his problem. His grief, weaponized, wasn't my burden. As I moved through that process, anger rose. I'd smothered it for years, thinking that anger meant ingratitude. Now I understood it as a flare. A line has been crossed. I'd spent so long chasing his approval, being convenient, carrying the weight he laid on me. I decided I wasn't playing that game anymore. Our calls during that time were rare and tense. I snapped. I had no patience for long-distance control, for the little stings and barbs. One day, I finally told him everything. It wasn't a rehearsed speech. The words tore their own path out. I laid out the years of blame, the impact on my mind, and the fact that I would no longer let him treat me as if I had no dignity. I said I wouldn't be his scapegoat anymore, and that if he couldn't offer basic respect, I'd end contact. For the first time in our history, he had nothing ready to say. He didn't apologize. Foolishly, I half expected it. But he didn't deny it either. After that, something in him shifted. With me, he was softer, more cautious, like he'd lost the certainty that he could crush my throat with impunity. Still, years of damage don't disappear under a blanket. I noticed the change, but I knew repair would take far more, if it was possible at all. Eventually, the edge wore down. I still felt tight around him, but I wasn't living in that old fog of guilt. I saw my life as mine, not as an endless repayment plan for someone else's tragedy. Sheila was a huge part of that. I told her I didn't know how I would have made it without her. She smiled and said I'd done it myself. She just kept the light on. Then he married Day. Small ceremony. I went with Sheila. It was strange, watching the happiness of a person who'd been my pain for so long. I went not for him, but for me, to close another door inside that kept slamming in the draft. I watched them dance and thought maybe marriage would give his life a little stability. Maybe beside someone else he'd soften. Maybe. A month passed. He called. I heard that familiar crack in his voice, the blend of guilt and the expectation that someone else would fix it. He told me he'd made a few bad financial moves and could barely make ends meet. He hadn't paid rent in 6 months. Eviction was looming. He couldn't tell Day. It would cause a fight. The dominoes fell fast, and at the end of the line, there I was, apparently. He asked for money. The old request. The old role. I said no. Not because I couldn't. I could. Because I wouldn't be his safety net. I had worked too hard to build my own life, and I wasn't starting a precedent where every failure of his became my duty. I hung up with that familiar heaviness, the one that shows up when you refuse to play the part people wrote for you. I talked to Sheila. No pressure. No moral lecturing. We sat in my kitchen with tea, and I told her how 2 forces were banging around inside me, the urge to help and the fear of walking back into a trap. She asked what I wanted. Not what's right. Not what's best for everyone. Me. I said I didn't want to give him cash, but if they truly had nowhere to go, maybe I could let them stay, temporarily, on clear terms, with boundaries we set out loud. I called him back. I can't cover your rent, I said, but you can stay here for a while. Long enough to get back on your feet, save, find a place. I lived alone in a small townhouse in the suburbs of Seattle, Washington. There was space for 2. I set the lines immediately. Temporary means temporary. This won't turn into forever. I expect real steps toward moving out fast. No, we'll see. No vague promises, just specifics. He took time to think I knew that tone, like he would be the one making the decision, when really I already had. He called back and said yes. I heard relief in his voice mixed with something I tried not to analyze. Am I hearing manipulation where I want to hear gratitude? I told him I'd get the guest room ready, that I'd meet them Tuesday evening, that the sheet with the house rules was on the kitchen table. I even printed it out, the paper itself a reminder that my boundaries were not requests. They were conditions. When I hung up, I sat a long time in the quiet. Outside, the sky was thick with early dark. Neighbors' windows blinked awake. The house I built for myself, with my hours, my work, my sleepless nights, was about to be shelter for the people who once didn't give me any. It felt like a paradox and a test, but I knew this time I was walking into it different, with a voice, with borders, with people who would hold my hand when I second-guessed. Most of all, with the right to say no if anyone tried to rewrite the rules of my home to suit themselves. 2 weeks later they moved in, my father and Day, and I made up the guest room for them. The first month was an adjustment for all of us. Years had passed since we'd lived under the same roof, and we were different people now. I wasn't the teenager who swallowed his criticism in silence anymore. I was a grown woman with my own life, my own house, my own rules. The house, mine. The mortgage and the repairs, mine. The peace, mine too. And in that peace there was no room left for someone else's commands. His old habits showed themselves fast, the second the novelty wore off. He started commenting on how I lived as if nothing had changed. The housework, the order of things, my daily routine, the way I stored groceries and arranged shelves. He always had something to say. Advice that sounded like orders. Corrections to things that didn't need fixing. Little remarks tossed out as if the space were his and the rules were his. This time, I wouldn't let his tone or his words drag me back to the past. Each time he slipped into criticism or tried to control me, I drew a line and asked him to stop. I made it clear, my decisions are not his jurisdiction, especially while he's living under my roof. I wasn't rude. I was firm. I wasn't going back to the old roles. They didn't like it. Twice she told me I should respect my father, that I ought to remember what he sacrificed for me. I just shook my head. She didn't know half of what he put me through. I respected the fact of family, but I was not about to let him wipe his feet on me again. And still, I didn't think it was my job to tell Day the whole story of my childhood. I left her comments unanswered, hoping we'd find a way to coexist without extra fights if we simply kept to our lanes. They would focus on finding a new apartment and on work. I would focus on my schedule and my calm. One evening, after a brutal day at work, I came home and found them in the living room, TV blaring, crumbs on the coffee table, soda cans, takeout containers, couch pillows pushed aside, throw blanket on the rug. In the kitchen, an unmissable tower of dirty dishes. I reminded him it was his cleaning day and asked why nothing had been done. He answered in that precise tone that used to lock up my jaw. "You're a grown woman I raised by myself after your mother died. Shame on you for asking me to do chores. Wash the dishes yourself." It was like a jolt, but I answered immediately, without a beat and without apologizing. "Do you know what's actually shameful? Sitting on my couch, in my house, eating my food, watching my TV and trying to boss me around, after you begged me to take you in for free. You and your wife haven't done a thing to help here. If you don't want to wash the dishes, you can pack your things and leave. Tonight." He just stared, stunned. Thick silence flooded the room. I could hear the clock ticking. For a second I thought he really would stand up and go, but I knew he had nowhere to go. I turned away and walked into the kitchen. A cabinet door banged shut louder than I meant it to. My heart was hammering with anger and disappointment. But this time, the anger wasn't burning me up from the inside. It stood like a wall, even and cold. In the morning, only Day was in the kitchen. He had left early. She asked to talk. I sat down across from her, not expecting much, just ready to be clear. Calm, businesslike, she said my father had been deeply hurt by what I'd said, and that I had no right to speak to him that way, considering how much money he spent to help you buy this house. My breath caught. That was a straight lie. I'd saved for this place myself, step by step. I asked her to clarify what exactly she meant. She said he'd told her he used some of his savings to help me with the purchase. I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. The story was that absurd. Before I could answer, Day went on. Since he had helped, I ought to show gratitude and repay part of the money by paying them rent for living in my home. After all, this is your father's house too, she added, like stamping a period onto a debate we weren't actually having. I explained, calmly and in detail, that I'm the sole owner of the house, that my father didn't put in a single cent, and that he could barely cover his own rent. How else did he end up here? I watched confusion and anger flicker across Day's face. Not anger at me, but at a situation she'd been sold as truth. He really never helped? She asked. I answered just as plainly. That ended the conversation. That same day she packed her things and left. I didn't stop her. Her choice wasn't mine to manage, and I wasn't going to referee their marriage. That evening, when he came home and saw her things gone, he called Day. When he learned I'd told her the truth about the house, he turned on me with accusations. I should have held my tongue. I had made his wife feel awkward. I had interfered. I had made him feel worthless next to me. In his logic, I was the guilty one, for refusing to back his lie. I reminded him I'd taken them in to help, not to become the last link in someone else's chain of manipulation. I said it again. I don't owe him anything, and the choices that led him here are his responsibility. He didn't listen. He demanded that I call Day, apologize, and fix the situation, meaning confirm his fiction about helping with the house. I refused. I was exhausted by the constant spin and blame. I told him, steady and firm, that I couldn't stand his presence in my home any longer. The constant arguments were taking a toll on my mental health. He needed to pack and move out tomorrow. And yes, just to be proper, I prepared a written notice the way we do here in Washington State, printed it, and left it on the kitchen table. He pushed back, begged for more time, said he had nowhere to go. But my decision was made. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're care. The next morning he left. After that came the calls and messages. He wrote and called to say I had ruined his life and his marriage, that Day refused to speak to him, that a good daughter would never kick out her parents. Every message tried to drag me into the old role where I was guilty by default. I didn't reply. Day by day, the quiet inside me got steadier while the calls got more insistent. In the end, I blocked him, phone, apps, email. 3 minutes work that saved me months of my future. The first days I just lived. I came home at night to a house without other people's footsteps, voices, or demands. The kitchen smelled like morning coffee again, not reproach. The living room stopped being the place where a TV turned itself up to full volume. I stood still for long stretches, listened to the coffee machine purr, and thought how strange it is that the biggest changes aren't always the loud decisions, but the small daily agreements with yourself that you are allowed to have peace. Sheila could see me exhale, and she didn't rush me to move on. She just stayed. We walked along the water. The suburbs of Seattle smell like salt and wet wood at night, and we talked about nothing. When I went quiet, she asked one question. How are you? That how didn't ask for a report. It offered a handhold. My answers changed. Fine. All kinds of ways. Free. Slowly, free stopped sounding like some borrowed word and started sounding like mine. Then a simple, quiet thought showed up on an ordinary morning. Maybe Day genuinely hadn't known. Her outrage that day hadn't felt like mean sport. It felt like a person arguing for what she thought was fair, off bad information. I decided to reach out, not to get back at my father or to expose anyone, but to put a period at the end of my part of the story. If someone has to choose, let them choose with the facts. We met at a small cafe near my house. Gray sky, fogged window glass, cups ringing softly. Day looked tired and guarded, but not hostile. We talked. I told her what she hadn't known, how he shifted guilt onto me for years, how joy was forbidden, how any attempt to be myself became a pretext for blame. I told her the house came from my work, my discipline, and some luck, not from his financial sacrifice. I explained why I won't let anyone, not even him, set the terms in my home. She listened carefully, asked a few questions, gentle ones, like someone seeing the full picture for the first time. Then she said it. My father had a long-running gambling problem. He'd lost almost everything. She'd kept quiet because he was ashamed and asked her to. When he suggested moving in with me, she was against it. It made her uncomfortable. So he lied, said he had helped financially with my house, so the move would feel less humiliating, like parents staying with a daughter rather than people who'd run out of options. Hearing from me that his help was invented, start to finish left her feeling duped. She said she was ashamed of having demanded rent from me that day in the kitchen. I told her it wasn't her fault, that the responsibility was his and his lies. She nodded once, a small nod without theatrics. We parted without promises, just with the understanding that now each of us could see what was actually there. She said she'd take a pause in the relationship with him to think it over. I didn't feel vindicated, just a tiredness that finally loosened. 3 months went by. Sometimes letters arrived from strange addresses, short and injured. Sometimes blocked numbers called and said nothing. I didn't reply and I didn't call back. I used to think a break would be a slammed door. Turns out, it's silence. In that silence, I learned again to wake without dread, to work without bracing for punishment, to laugh without checking myself. I went back to the things I'd dropped because of the chronic fatigue of endless conflict, sketching in the evenings, running by the water, rereading favorite books. A new list went up on the fridge, not what I must, but what I want. On the nights when the old echo voices tried to return, Sheila held my hand and said, "You did the right thing. You chose yourself." Not a slogan, just the truth. I chose myself, my house, my rules, my life. And now the house is quiet again. There's a weekly plan on the kitchen table, dishes stacked neatly in the cupboards, a throw on the sofa. I pull around my shoulders as I watch the neighbors' lights. This order isn't about hardness, it's about choice. I choose to live like this. Sometimes I think about how easily we mix up words like respect and submission, family and obligation, help and control. I used to give more than I had, just to fit someone else's script. Now I know the worth of my time, my nerves, my quiet. I know love isn't permission to trample boundaries, and boundaries aren't proof of a lack of love. No one, not even the person who's been there since the day you were born, gets to turn your life into a stage for their unhealed wounds. Since he left, my house stopped being a loyalty test and became a home again. Here it smells like coffee and weekend baking, like page turns and the sea wind when we open the window, Sheila and I. No one measures your value by how much you're willing to sacrifice. You can just live, without caveats, without the guilty glance over your shoulder. I don't know whether we'll ever have the kind of conversation where we call things by their right names. Maybe. But I do know that whatever words show up in that future talk, I have one non-negotiable condition. There will be no lies and no accusations in my life. Under any roof. Even if it's the roof of my own home in the United States, in the suburbs of Seattle, where I finally learned to live the way I believe is right. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. See you in the next video.